Welcome to Hope Natural Health, the podcast inspiring you to be your best version. Join me, your host, Dr. Erin, naturopathic doctor, dog mom, cancer survivor, and girl boss weekly as we discuss all things health, hormones, and happiness with a little side of this thing called life. Awesome. Welcome back to the Hope Natural Health podcast. Last week we discussed gut hormones, and this week we're kind of going around the same kind of topic, staying with the gut. I have a special guest here, Josh, he is an ex-paramedic and a holistic nutritionist who specializes in gut health. It was the successes of his clients who have had complex digestive issues, previously thought to be impossible, that got him connected to some of the world's most renowned doctors. Since then, he's been recruited to the Priority Health Academy as a medical lecturer, helping educate doctors on the holistic approach to gut health and complex digestive issues. So I'm super excited that he's here today. So welcome to the show, Josh.
It's a pleasure to be here, Erin. Thanks so much for having me on board.
Of course. So I look forward to diving more into the gut. It's such an important topic, and it really is misdiagnosed and underdiagnosed a lot that I see clinically in practice. And as a naturopathic doctor, we really, prioritize gut health. So it's one of the first areas that I always go to and what I consider one of the foundations of health. So I'm really excited to jam on this today. But first, tell me a little bit more about your background and how you went from a paramedic and now to a holistic nutritionist and how you just dive into gut health. I'd be curious to hear your background.
There was a lot of accidents, actually. So I kind of just ended up here. I was a paramedic, like you mentioned, and it was sick care, not health care. It wasn't what I loved to do. It wasn't what I wanted to do. And so after a chain of events, realizing very quickly that the people I was helping in the ambulance, I take them to the hospital for the same thing over and over. They get new drugs or more drugs, or something would change in their masking of the symptoms. They go back home until they were dead from the same issue that never got fixed. And so through a chain of events, I ended up in personal training in my early 20s. And the first client who came to see me, it was really the catalyst, looking back, really the launching board that propelled me forward here, because I realized the immense healing capabilities of the body. This woman was on 17 pills and a shot of insulin for breakfast, 9 pills of insulin for bedtime, had a CPAP machine, high blood pressure, the works. And in 2 years' time, she was off all but 2 medications that were just strictly due to a surgery she had done. She was feeling and moving incredibly. Pain was gone. She was, no longer diagnosed, no longer diabetic, no longer on disability. And at age 59, she broke a world record in the Raw division of the Powerlifting Federation of Canada.
Oh, wow.
And so it was incredible. And that to me just really was that pad that said the human body is incredible. And so I just did more diving and more research, ended up at a trade show, listening to someone actually promotion for nutritionist schooling, talking about the gut microbiome. And for a 30-minute lecture, my jaw was on the floor. And it was love at first sight. I said, that is what I'm doing for the rest of my life. And I was hooked instantly. And then by need, I now help people reverse Crohn's and colitis.
I love it. I love it. So let's dive into the gut microbiome. How would you break down what exactly is our gut microbiome?
What isn't our microbiome? I argue it may be as, if not more important in some regards than our DNA. Our gut microbiome is 2 to 3% of our entire body weight is just microbes, the actual weight. It interacts with everything. It's responsible for genetic expression, how social you feel like being on a given day, hormonal balancing. It even produces some nutrients. It does detoxification. It's part of your immune system. It does everything. And a dysfunctional gut microbiome is connected, or dysfunctional gut in some way is connected to 14 out of 15 of the leading causes of death in the USA. As per the CDC, if you look them up, we're talking heart disease, cancers, cerebrovascular disease or strokes, diabetes, Alzheimer's, kidney disease, liver disease, Parkinson's, hypertension. Things all come back in some way to a link to the gut. And so our gut is everything. It's the center of all of us. In fact, our microbes as a whole are the center of all of us. We're born 99% human cells, 1% microbes. By the time we die, we're 90% microbes and 10% human.
Dang. You said 14 out of 15. What's the one that is not related?
This might blow you away. It's suicide, accidents, or injuries.
Suicide, accidents, or injuries. And that's all lumped into one? Huh.
Into one category, yeah. So
That's
self-harm, accidents,
interesting.
injuries, which means
So,
every
oh,
quote
okay.
normal cause of death is not normal. In fact, it's a chronic inflammatory condition that we theoretically could entirely prevent.
Interesting. So talk a little bit more about like microbes. How would you define microbes? How many do we have? I know we have good ones, we have bad ones. Let's, kind of talk to fifth graders here a little bit about that.
Sure. So microbes are these itty bitty little creatures that perform tiny little functions that without them we'd probably be very dead. Right? There's about 100 trillion of them inside of our body. Again, for perspective, they outnumber your own body cells 10 to 1. And these little microbes live in communities. Right? We call it a microbiome. You have microbiomes in your gut. There's a microbiome, a community in your mouth. You have them rectally, vaginally, on your hair, on your skin, your groin, your armpits. They're all different microbiomes everywhere. They're like neighborhoods inside of a city that communicate with each other to perform specific functions. And when one neighborhood of that city is dysfunctional, everything else around it starts to get brought down as well. And so I effectively look at them like fish in a fishbowl. We have fish in this fishbowl. That's your ecosystem. These are your probiotics, your microbes, the living organisms that make up this ecosystem of this microbiome. Well, inside that fishbowl, of course, you have prebiotics and postbiotics. That's your fish food, what the fish eat, and then they poop postbiotics. And so you have these probiotic living organisms that eat and poop just like you, just like a fish. And it's these byproducts of all these interactions that they have together that are signaling molecules for our body that tell it to do certain things, perform certain functions, behave or act a certain way. And it's just this really remarkable ecosystem we truthfully can't live without.
So how do we know if our gut microbiome is being affected or if it's healthy or unhealthy?
That's a really good question. How it's being affected, assume it is always being affected. In fact, the question is, again, what doesn't affect it? Everything we eat, everything we drink, what we breathe, what we take for supplements, for snacks, everything has an impact because those microbes eat, break down, digest, and absorb everything that we eat. And so that's how they're affected, is everything is influenced by it. Even your stress can influence that in some way, shape, or form. And so there was a second half to your question there. I just slipped my mind. What was that one, Erin?
Just how do we know if it's healthy or unhealthy?
So a healthy microbiome typically will see healthy brain, healthy skin, healthy nails, healthy hair, good moods. You're not going to feel bloated ever. So we often think about the gut and go, well, if my gut's unhealthy, I'll know my microbiome's off. But if you have acne, psoriasis, eczema, asthma, diabetes, all these things can be byproducts of a disrupted microbiome. And so if we want to have it sure it's healthy, you're lucky if you have digestive issues. If you're someone who has a bit of bloat, constipation, gas, diarrhea, if you're somebody who deals with any of these negative side effects, you're the lucky one because you have a direct signal from the source saying, I'm having a problem. But if you're someone who doesn't, it's hard to trace it back.
Right. And I think that's really important. And I see that a lot. A lot of times we don't think that there's anything wrong with our gut because it's not like the symptoms aren't manifesting in our gut. But what we don't know, and what you just pointed out, is that it can manifest in other areas like your skin or headaches or brain fog or hormone dysfunction. It doesn't always have to be gas, bloating, diarrhea, constipation, things like that, right?
Absolutely. It can manifest quite literally anywhere. And again, all of these diseases we talked about, blood pressure, kidney disease, liver disease, diabetes, Alzheimer's, they can all be connected back to the gut. So really, any manifestation of any disease, you should at least do some assessing on or some nurturing for your gut.
So you said nurturing the gut. How do you recommend one nurtures the gut?
This is really tricky to answer. And so I'm going to come at it from a couple different ways. I know we think it should be easy, and there's arguments across every facet of nutrition. Do you go animal-based or plant-based, more fiber, less fiber? What does it matter? Really what I look for is if I can measure someone's gut, through a gut microbiome mapping, we call it GI mapping. If you can do that, realistically, you're measuring 50 to 100 bacteria out of 100 trillion. Really, it's really not that much. It's a grain of sand on the beach. It's actionable stuff. But if you have somebody with a lot of overgrowth, for example, in their gut, you have too many fish in the fish tank, or you have really big fish that shouldn't be inside this fish tank, it's going to be dysfunctional of an ecosystem. It's not going to work very well. And so do we want to eat the right things. So if I have too many fish, I might go more animal-based with less fiber, which might actually start to kill off some of these excess species, or at least put them in a dormancy so they're not hyperactive, pooping out all these bad byproducts into my fish tank, sort of polluting my ecosystem. On the other hand, if I have a lack of a lot of bacteria in my gut, maybe I need to nurture it by introducing new species. Maybe that's fiber, maybe that's ferments, maybe that's probiotics, maybe it's what we call spore-based probiotics, which are more like seeds, which plant a tree and grow fruit, rather than probiotics that might just kind of come and go on their own. There's many different ways to nurture a microbiome. My first thing we want to look at really is what started this imbalance in the first place. If you're somebody who's trying to nurture it back to health, right? Picture it, you got a headache, and I'm hitting you in the head with a hammer. Right? The only way to get rid of the headache isn't with an aspirin, it's to get me to stop hitting you in the head. And so if my microbiome is imbalanced and it's off kilter, I have overgrowth or undergrowth, I need to figure out what started the problem first. We often jump to what can I take? What can I do? What's the intervention I can do for myself, rather than going preventative and reverse engineering the breakdown process.
So do you like to do testing? Like gut testing?
Sometimes I do. It's become a lot more commonplace, with as different tests start to develop and we learn more information. I do a lot less gut microbiome testing, right? Specializing in Crohn's and colitis, gut microbiome, when it's disrupted, is often disrupted as a byproduct of something else. And so I might use other testing for people to see what's going on, like an organic acids test. And so for those listening, it's a great urine test. All of your cells, think of them like producing exhaust. If you go to the gym and you work out, you feel that lactic acid in the body that makes you stiff and sore. That's kind of like exhaust from the muscle cells. Every cell in your body creates this exhaust, which we can measure in this urine test. So I can see if there's maybe fungal issues in the body, if there's maybe mold or other dysfunction. Even looking at blood work can help indicate parasites. Above all else, we have to look at symptoms. Like what is it that's creating this gut dysfunction or this inflammation, right? You wouldn't live in a house that's down, right? With no roof, broken windows. You can't live in that. Neither can your microbes. These little guys, this microbiome is living in your gut. If you're inflamed, like a house on fire, they don't want to live there either. And so you get this functional bacteria that does live and thrive in those areas. And this is what we can measure in other types of testing, primarily through symptoms.
Love it. You talked a little bit about probiotics and the spore probiotics, and there's so many probiotics out there. Just like you talked about, the probiotics will replete the good bacteria in our gut, but we have so many. So I get asked all the time, and I'm a fan of rotating probiotics just because we have so many. But we also want to caution against just taking a probiotic without really knowing what's going on with your own gut, because sometimes the probiotics can be aggravating if we have, SIBO or small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. So when people come to you, or just in general information, what is your take on probiotics, and how do you look at the recommendations for that? Because there's so many.
There are so many. Every strain has a different species, a different genus. So you could get, say, a lactobacilli and have hundreds of different species of them, different genetics, right? It's like saying there's women in this building, okay? Like what color hair, what color eyes, what do they do, what are their skills? They all do different things, right? You can classify them all as women, but you're not getting down to the nitty-gritty of it. So it's not enough information. And so when we're trying to build an ecosystem, they need to have different skill sets to support each other as a community. And so I look at probiotics, I look at them really reactively for the most part, sometimes proactively. Everything has a different skill set. So if someone has a mold infection, there are certain probiotics that can help buffer the immune system in that way and bind onto mold. Saccharomyces boulardii is a great one, happens to inhibit candida. If we look at somebody going through antibiotic treatment, especially through Crohn's and colitis, they just throw antibiotics at them like freaking candy. And so things like certain lactobacilli or bifidobacterium strains, the most common ones that get over the counter, can be really great for helping prevent recurrent C. diff infections. It's a nasty, deadly bacteria common in these conditions by taking these probiotics. So I use them very strategically. I try not to just throw stuff at the wall and see what sticks, because like you said, if you have certain overgrowths and you contribute to them, it can be problematic. Then there's also evidence of some probiotics in SIBO conditions perhaps being beneficial. Dr. William Lee, for example, talks about Lactobacillus reuteri, even utilizing in yogurt for SIBO, having been shown in clinical studies and clinical trials beneficial in clearing out the excess. So you have to be very specific. But if I could drop a word of caution to the listeners and just say, we often get in this idea of like, what can I take? What's the pill, the supplement, the probiotic, this or that? Right back to coming back to the root.
Mm-hmm.
Inflammation, for example, is always there for a reason. It's your body's response trying to heal you. If you have
Mm-hmm.
a thorn or a nail stuck in your hand and you think, well, I really better get that out. I'm swollen, I'm infected, it's bleeding, it's pussy. You go to your doctor and they give you numbing cream for the pain, you'd be really upset. Like, pull the
Mm-hmm.
thorn out of my hand. It's clearly why I'm inflamed. When it comes to internal conditions, we often think, what supplement, what probiotic, what's the thing I can take? That's numbing cream for the pain, or it's plant-based
Yeah.
medicine looking for the thorn in your gut or what caused this disease process, this inflammation. And so probiotics can be a part of that process.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's to numb the hand before you pull the thing out, but ultimately you have to figure out why and how it got there.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's go back a little bit to, you touched a little bit on things and what affects our microbiome, but throughout our day process, what are everyday exposures that are really affecting our microbiome?
It's microscopic things for the most part, things we
Yeah.
don't count. I mean, on a
Mm-hmm.
macro level, of course, drinking, smoking, alcohol consumption, junk food, processed foods, these are foods we're
Mm-hmm.
never meant to eat. We have an autoimmune crisis, an obesity crisis happening right now in North
Mm-hmm.
America. We're seeing gut disease on the rise. Back in 1990, there was 1.5-ish million cases of inflammatory bowel disease. This is the worst of the worst. For those
Mm-hmm.
listening, go, I don't have Crohn's or colitis. If you have bloat, you're on the risk spectrum for wearing out your gut until maybe it pops off. But we have north of 8 million cases in the world today. So we 5-6x our cases of diagnosed bowel disease, while
Mm-hmm.
72+% of all Americans complain of bloat, constipation, diarrhea, pain, acid reflux, cramping at least once a week. And so we have an epidemic of gut disease coming from these modern foods. That's where we have to start, number one. Every medication you take, everything, basically anything you consume that your great 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 grandmother would not recognize is contributing to your gut disease. Right? Even like the chemicals in our food. You put chemicals in coffee, sugar pumps in Starbucks coffee. You look at the things we spray, the pesticides, herbicides, fungicides. All these things are major contributors. And
Mm-hmm.
everything that would not have existed hundreds of years ago is going to be problematic in some way, shape, or form.
Absolutely. I know stress plays a giant role in our gut health. So can you explain how that directly impacts our gut microbiome? I deal with, I swear, I mean, I help mostly women, and every single woman that comes to my office is, I ask them on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the most, how would you rate your stress most days? And I would say on average, it's at least a 7 or more. So can we dive into
Wow.
how stress directly impacts our gut health?
Yeah, we absolutely can. I think that's great. So first we have to look at how the brain works under stress. It fires out stress hormones. So there's a couple
Mm-hmm.
of really basic ways that we can see stress chemicals that can negatively influence the gut, super high elevated levels of stress hormones like cortisol. It's a good hormone. We need it. It's
Mm-hmm.
anti-inflammatory. It's moving in the morning. But in supranatural levels, in elevated levels, it can become really inflammatory. It can really
Mm-hmm.
start to wear down your gut lining. It can mess up your motility. Like, think of a gut lining like the sock inside on your foot inside of a shoe. Without
Mm-hmm.
it, you're going to rub that heel till it blisters and bleeds. And many of us are on this spectrum right now. A little bit of bloat, a little bit of gas, a little bit of discomfort. Maybe you're having a bowel movement every other day instead of twice a day. Right? There's all kinds of little things that can be contributing to this wear and tear. And so we
Mm-hmm.
need a healthy sock inside of that shoe to prevent
Mm-hmm.
your heel from blistering. And that's your gut lining. High levels of stress can really break that down. It can start depleting your stomach acid production, for example, which you need to break down, digest, and absorb nutrients, to extract iron out of your food, your digestive enzyme production. Right? If you're in fight and flight, you're not in rest and digest. And so
Mm-hmm.
if you're high stress, you're turning up the volume knob of this fight and flight response, which in the same way turns down your volume knob of rest and digest, which is exactly what it sounds like.
Yeah.
And take that another step. Your gut is an assembly line. It works in timing. Everything in a gut works through timing, from chewing to swallowing. We call motility, or this milking a movement of food through the digestive tract till it exits. These processes all work in good timing. Well, high stress also messes up that timing, which messes up
Mm-hmm.
your digestion, how you break down and absorb. It can cause hyperfermentation of certain foods in the gut, leading to bacterial imbalances and dysfunction. If you don't have stomach acid because you're high stress, you have dysregulation or poor control of bacteria coming through your digestive system. There's so many factors
Yeah.
from just simply being stressed. And so
Mm-hmm.
learning to just take a breath before you eat can really be a huge help.
And even chewing your food, right?
Such an underrated part. We always talk
Right?
about what to eat, how do we eat? To put your feet on the
Yes.
floor, to sit, to pause, right? Take a breath. Don't drink
Yes.
a gallon of water during your meal. Little things like that can make all the difference.
Yeah, it's crazy how we forget the little basics, right? I
Oh,
love
yeah,
your
it's silly
analogies.
humans.
I love your analogies.
Thank you.
They make it so fun and so relatable. So I appreciate that. Is there anything else that you feel would be a great addition to this topic that we haven't discussed yet? I don't know if you want to throw anything in there about Crohn's or colitis, a little bit about what that is and how you're, passionate about that. And yeah, if there's anything you want to mention about that.
Crohn's and colitis is one of the most overlooked diseases, and we're seeing it more and more.
Mm-hmm.
Doctors give it basically three classifications, right? It's idiopathic, meaning no known cause. It's autoimmune, which means your body's attacking you and they feel there's nothing we can do about it. Or on the other hand, they say maybe it's environmental, whatever that even means.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's these unknown diseases that they just don't really do anything about, when in reality, 95+% of the time, they're entirely reversible. And so people are getting bad information from their doctors. We're treating these chronic inflammatory conditions with numbing cream, right? I mean, the idea being that if you put it into, quote, remission, where it's no longer painful or inflamed, that's not fixing the problem, right? If you have a hostage in your house and you tape their mouth, just because they're not screaming doesn't mean they want to be there. We still have to take care of it. And so these Crohn's and colitis are super inflammatory diseases that happen in your digestive tract, where ulcerative colitis is the large intestine. And we'll see primarily these strips and chunks of inflammation that are very surface level. And they can go, a couple centimeters at a time, or however long they really want to go, to the whole colon. Whereas Crohn's disease tends to come in patches, and it's much deeper. So instead of scuffing Nini on the pavement, you've maybe scooped a chunk out of it by falling on a rock. It's much deeper into the tissues, and it can go anywhere from mouth to anus. But the idea is Western medicine has spent a lot of time and money saying IBS, or irritable bowel syndrome, and IBD, which is inflammatory bowel disease, are very different. There's nothing like them. They're very unique. These diseases are all separate. There's no known causes. They're just autoimmune. But in reality, back to the first point earlier we made, that inflammation isn't random. Your body inflames in reaction to something in an attempt to heal you. We have to figure out what it's trying to heal you from. And in my experience, I've worked with hundreds of Crohn's and colitis clients over the years. I've maybe seen a handful, 2%, which actually have autoimmunity. But even then, we can manage 75% of that. If it's genetic autoimmunity, 75% can be managed. But it's not genetic, simply put. You might have genes that make you prone to expressing inflammation this way or in this place, but genetics don't mean you're dealt a bad hand.
Right.
It just makes no sense to me. The Western approach is almost laughable when we look at how easy Crohn's and colitis can be to reverse.
Oh, I love it. Yeah. So if you have Crohn's or colitis, there's hope. There's hope with any GI disorder, really. Yeah, or any disorder, not just the gut. It's crazy. Yeah, Western medicine. Labels. I know. And you're doomed with it. It's like, what was that?
Sorry, I think we have a little bit of a sound delay here. So we're jumping in front of each other. But if I could throw a quick little anecdote here. I had a fella come in, just for the listeners who go, oh no, I call BS. It doesn't make sense. I had a fella come in, 22-year-old male, and his doctor said it's just genetic. His doctor is Jewish, and this fellow is Jewish. And he says, actually, like statistically, it does happen more in Jewish people. Therefore, it's genetic. There's nothing we can do about this. Sorry, you're having this condition. Here's some drugs. Take 4 pills a day, and that should take care of the problem. And it did mask its symptoms, but now the hostage has tape over its mouth, but it's still screaming. We just can't hear it. And so we went with this gentleman, 22 years old, took a 15-minute history to figure out. He got sick. He was perfectly healthy. Got sick 2 months into starting a new job. He got diagnosed with IBS, or irritable bowel syndrome. Bowel movements were increasing, food sensitivities. His transit time was really fast. 20 minutes after eating, he'd be in the bathroom. 6 months later, he had blood and mucus in his stool, went in, was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis, and given this genetic, random, maybe God hates you type of answer. Who knows what it is, which makes sense. Well, it took us 15 minutes to realize his new job was HVAC. He's working in ventilation systems. So we ran a urine test, and lo and behold, he had a mold infection, because his body was now reacting to this mycotoxin called or ochratoxin A, well known to cause kidney disease, asthma, and of course, well known to cause bowel disease. And so 10 women, it's out of taken care of, bing, bang, boom, no problem, no disease, no issues whatsoever, and he's still Jewish. So it had nothing to do with his genetics and everything with his doctor misinterpreting the results and blaming it on some unknown cause. And so there is hope for every disease. We just have to know why your body's inflamed, and sometimes it's that easy.
Absolutely. Have you seen a correlation with heavy metals and gut disease too?
Well, it's interesting. So I haven't seen heavy metals as much in my practice being the cause, but what's really interesting is people who are prone to accumulating mold, for example, due to genes like this MTHFR that's got popular lately, are more prone to accumulating heavy metals as well, as they have a compounding effect.
Interesting.
I haven't seen, like I said, heavy metals per se being the cause, but very much so being part and parcel, particularly in those with autism or this MTHFR gene.
Wow. Fascinating. Well, Josh, I really appreciate you being on here today. I'm going to wrap it up with one question I ask all my podcast guests. What would be your best or favorite health tip that you can share with the audience?
I'm going to give you a two-parter here. The first one's actually a quote from a friend of mine, Ben Azadi, and he says brilliantly, humans are the only species smart enough to make their own food and stupid enough to eat it. And so we have to realize that the foods we're consuming and the junk we're putting in our body are causing problems. Number two, just because you may have a diagnosis or your doctor's put a word, a medical word that describes your symptoms, you don't have to identify it with it. You're not stuck with it. It's not this condition that happens. We often cling to a diagnosis like, well, now I have answers. Now at least I have an explanation. It means nothing. A diagnosis is a word that in one snapshot will tell any clinician or professional that this is what's going on. Now we know your symptoms with this one word. It means nothing. It's just you've now named the hostage, but nobody says why they're there, why they're screaming, what they need, what they want, why they're being held hostage. We just given them a name. That's all it really is. And so there's always hope no matter where you are on the gut disease spectrum.
Oh, I love that. That's wonderful. And that's the name of my podcast, Hope Natural Health, and why I named my practice that is because I give hope to people. So I love that. Thank you so much for your time today. Is there anything that you have? I don't have it in my show notes, but is there any free resources or, a program or anything that you have? We'll obviously include that in the show notes. But if you want to talk about it, now's your chance.
Oh, good. Absolutely. I've spent a long time working with people, and we know gut can be extraordinarily expensive to fix a lot of the time.
Yep.
And so my colleagues and I have been working for several years to create a program now where it can really just help everyone. Everything can be found at gutsolution.ca. Is my website. It's all singular, gutsolution.ca. We do, of course, small group programming. We also recently came out with a new program on Skool. That's SKOOL, brand new platform that's come out. It's a perfect hybrid between like a private Facebook group and a course platform with experts and speakers and giveaways and all kinds of amazing stuff you can get in there by just heading over to gutsolution.ca and finding us to join the community.
Awesome. Well, all of that will be in the show notes and all of Josh's contact information as well. So again, thank you so much for being here today, Josh.
Thanks so much for having me, Erin. It's been a pleasure.
Of course. We'll see you all next week.